Hello, everyone, and welcome. It's wonderful to see so many of you joining us today. This is the second webinar in our new series, Animals, Ethics, and Justice Beyond the Human. And just to say a little bit about this new series, it brings together scholars, educators, and practitioners to explore what it means to live responsibly with other animals on a shared planet. Across societies, animals are often treated as resources or background to human life. And in the series, we want to make a difference and to take a different approach that is grounded in multi-species justice. And this multi-species justice concept recognizes that animals are morally relevant beings whose lives are shaped by human systems. And we ask how our legal, economic, scientific, and educational structures might be rethought to support more just and compassionate forms of coexistence. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Maria Goller. Maria majored in biology and she holds a PhD in animal behavior and ecology. And she has a long-standing passion for observing animals in the wild and is particularly interested in vocal communication and in social interactions among individuals. Her work combines behavioral research with conservation storytelling to help people better understand animals and their lives. And she's also featured in the documentary Maria and the Flock that is produced by We Animals, and which follows her work with rescued chickens at the Sanctuary Animal Place, a sanctuary in California. And the film highlights the individuality and complex social lives of chickens, as well as the lasting impact of industrial animal agriculture. And I can also put the link in the chat. You can watch that documentary on YouTube. I highly recommend it. Maria, thank you so much for joining us today. It's very amazing to have you. After I saw the documentary, I thought I need to reach out and have you as a speaker in our new series. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Welcome, everyone. So as Kathrin said, I have spent my life observing and interacting with animals, mostly wild animals. I am a behavioral ecologist, and I've always focused only on observational and non-invasive behavior. And I spent 1.5 years at a farmed animal sanctuary where I was really advocating for improved bird care. And what I mean by this is treating every bird as an individual and focusing on changes in their behavior as an indication of health issues. Quick outline of what we will be talking about today. First, I would like to talk about egg-laying hens and my hospice care program. Then I will share a bit about roosters because they are very misunderstood. Then we will talk a little bit about a breed of chickens raised for meat called Cornish cross. We will shift into some behavioral research findings about cognition and intelligence. And we will finish talking about industrial agriculture and all types of chicken farms. But before I talk about chickens and my experiences with them, I would like to introduce you to the species that is their ancestor, the red jungle fowl. These small birds live in family groups of 10 to 15 individuals, so very small social groups. They have very complicated social relationships within the groups, as do we. They evolved in complex habitats, so they live in jungles and forest edges in Asia. So that kind of changed how their behavior is. It fueled their evolutionary trajectory. They are generally shy and secretive birds, and they were domesticated about 8,000 years ago, so a long time ago. This is what they look like. They're very small, but the boys are very colorful, and the females are very camouflaged, so they are hard to find, and generally lay about one clutch of eggs, so about 7 to 10 eggs every year. This is very different from egg-laying hens. So egg-laying hens are bred to produce about 300 eggs a year. That's one egg a day almost. And because of this, they have a lot of suffering, and they have a lot of health issues. So one thing that is a huge concern is that eggs are a drain of energy and nutrients. So all of this energy that should go to the hen and her growth is channeled into eggs. Egg-laying hens often have a lot of deficiencies, including calcium deficiencies for the eggshell. They have strain on their skeletons, their cloaca, where eggs and poop exit the body, and their reproductive system. Something that isn't discussed that often is that laying eggs is actually really painful and can often be bloody, and it also impacts their psychology. So birds that are constantly laying may become very broody, which means they want to just sit on a nest. So even if you take the eggs away, they might start showing behaviors like hiding in an area, no longer eating, no longer interacting with the world around them because they're just supposed to take care of their eggs. And this intensive breeding has also made them susceptible to many diseases and cancers. Unfortunately, all of these health issues worsen with age. When I started at the sanctuary, most of the birds were already about 5 years old, so that is quite old. They stop laying as often at about 2 years of age, so anything after that is pretty old. And most of them, if not all, had been rescued from bad situations, so they had not been taken good care of before they made it to the sanctuary. The sad reality is that these birds were bred to suffer, and so care is generally an uphill battle. You try to alleviate problems, but often you can't cure their illnesses. So you're just trying to make life enjoyable for them. I am a passionate advocate for humane euthanasia for all animals, including birds. And this is really when quality of life is poor and you've tried treatments and there's just no chance of improvement. The reason I put this in my talk is because I think a lot of people think that natural deaths are good ones, but often natural deaths are very excruciating and may take a long time. So if you're keeping an animal alive because you think, oh, they're okay and they should die naturally, I would consider that a very selfish reason to keep them around when you can just put them to sleep very gently and quickly. So at the sanctuary, I was focused on improving chicken care, as I said. So that was learning every individual's normal personality so you can identify medical issues. I also focused on creating care plans for every individual. I did a lot of research on new medications and treatments, different foods you can try, all kinds of things that would help with quality of life. And my pride and joy was I started a hospice program at my home where I would take birds home with me and give them very good care at the end of life. I will not be talking a lot about medical issues in this talk, so if you have any questions about medical related things, please save them to the end and I will gladly answer them. All right, my hospice program. This was very needed at the sanctuary because there are over 200 birds, or there were when I started, there were over 200 birds in the barn in one enormous flock. So this is very overcrowded. It causes stress for everyone, and especially for sick or old hens. Chickens are very social, just like we are, but they thrive in small groups. And so if you have them in large groups, you get a lot of weird things happening like competition and conflict over space, so just room in the yard, but also for food. And during the night, every chicken generally wants the same sleeping spot. So if you have too many birds, they will all fight over just a few places in the barn. So it was important to bring home hens who were clearly struggling in the barn. And I provided them with all kinds of, I guess you could call advanced care. So if they were dehydrated, they got fluids and special medications. I tried very hard to find foods that they would like. So sometimes it would be the strangest things like pomegranates that a hen would just absolutely love. They also were allowed to sleep inside during the night, so they were very warm with blankets and just a very cozy setup. Some of them slept with me or slept on my couch. They also got baths when they needed them or enjoyed them. So overall, just a lot of comfort provided that normally the birds wouldn't get in the barn. And they also got outdoor exploration time in an area that was very green, that had logs and rocks to explore in, versus at the sanctuary where the yard was just dirt because they had like pecked through everything, again, because there were too many birds. So I will tell you a bit about some of these girls that shared my life and my home. Um, and I got to know them very, very well, obviously, because they lived with me. And many of them recovered quite a bit when I took them home. So some of them lived with me for over a year. This is Beetle. Like this picture shows, she slept all day in the barn and she had a lot of digestive issues. She was very tired all of the time, and so she wasn't eating. She also would get bothered by other hens. So when I went into the barn with her, she would do what she's doing in this picture. She would just lie down on my hand and go to sleep and be unbothered. Very sweet girl. The nice thing about Beetle is that she really perked up when I brought her home. She started enjoying to explore, started enjoying exploring, um, both inside and outside. So she really liked sunbathing in my houseplants and destroying them. We also went outside for little foraging trips, and she would sit on my lap. So she was very much a lap chicken. She liked watching TV. The rocking chair was her favorite place outside because it was a nice place to hide. And we dug a lot for worms and things that she enjoyed eating. Something about Beetle that I never had to do for any of my other hens was I tube fed her most days, and this was because she really wasn't eating enough, going back to her history of digestive issues and eating issues, and that just allowed her to have enough energy to enjoy life. Another thing about Beetle that was very fun is that she became jealous when I showed another bird any attention or affection. So she would run over and assert herself and say, "Hello, pay attention to me." And the last few weeks of her life, she slept on my chest, and she was just a very sweet, sweet girl. So, some lessons from Beetle. I learned a bit about the types of things that make life enjoyable for a sick hen, which can differ widely for each hen. She was also a very, very joyful bird, which I hadn't seen much of in the barn. She taught me that individuals may be quite bright and alert while they're dying, and that can make things very difficult. So I chose to euthanize her, and most people thought, oh, she's fine, but I knew her behavior and knew that actually she was struggling. And she taught me that chickens are fully capable of jealousy, which is not something I usually think of with animals. The bird she was most jealous of was Gnome. So Gnome came to us from this big rescue that we did, and she was totally fine until one day We found her in the morning and she was paralyzed, so she could not walk or use her legs, and she could not see. This is something that actually happens kind of often with egg-laying hens, and often it's because they have taken a fall. So at the sanctuary, there were a lot of roosters who were very submissive during the day, and at night, they thought it was their chance to mate with hens, so they would yank them off of perches, which is very dangerous for sick and any hen, really. So that was a possibility, and sometimes also they will become paralyzed and blind from illness. In Gnome's case, we were pretty sure it happened because she fell. And when I took her home, like this picture on the right, she regained her mobility, but not her sight. Gnome completely changed life at home. Before, it was just Beetle living with me, and suddenly there's this very, very sweet mama's girl. What do I mean by that? Well, every day when I came home, she would come running toward me, calling. She followed me everywhere in the apartment, so I could not go to the bathroom and close the door. She always wanted to be in there with me. If I closed the door, she would cry very sadly on the other side. When I was cooking, she would stand basically on my feet so I couldn't move, and she was always snuggling with me. So this picture in the middle here, this is what she would do when we went outside. Beetle would be enjoying exploring and sunbathing, and Gnome would just hide tucked into my armpit. Here she is shortly before she passed away. So a few things I learned from Gnome are just how resilient chickens are. And I already knew this about other animals, but she demonstrated that neglected individual chickens can become just the most loving and cuddly critters. And something I really was not aware of is that adult chickens can basically imprint on you, because I think that's really what happened to her. She acted like a chick around me. This is Gabriella. Gabby was a slightly different scenario because she was an egg-laying breed that is mostly decorative, so they aren't overbred as much for egg production. And she did not have any illness or health issue that brought her to me. What happened with Gabby is she probably had some kind of neurological issue early on, and she would eat things that were not food. So this is something that can happen with humans as well. It's called, I think, pica or pica in humans, where there's some nutrient absorption issue and people will start eating clay or sucking on rocks. In Gabby's case, it was eating straw, and straw will clog up a chicken's digestive system and food can't pass through anymore. So she needed surgery where they just cut her open and removed all the straw. And after that, she just really was struggling in the barn. She didn't want to eat. She didn't want to approach other chickens, so I asked to take her home. As you can see in these pictures, she really loved dust bathing. She probably loved it more than any other hen I've ever had. And she really loved food and would come running toward me when I called her name because she thought maybe Maria has something for me. Let me go check. She never became cuddly toward me, but she did form very strong friendships with some of the other hens at my house, Shrimp and Kamala, who I will talk about in a moment. She also was a bit of a troublemaker, and she always had an opinion about everything. So she would come over talking the entire time, and I never really understood what she was trying to say, but she definitely had an opinion about things. Also, because I mentioned neurological issues earlier, another reason I think she had some is because she had hyperfixation on specks of dirt. So she could spend 10 minutes pecking at just a tiny, tiny speck of dirt that I could barely see, and that isn't really normal. Birds do like exploring little specks and things because they might be food, but normally they'll peck at them once and then move on. So these are the kind of the things I learned from Gabby, just kind of different behavioral traits that I hadn't really thought about. Patagonia is the same breed as Gnome and also came from that rescue. She actually arrived with neurological issues. So down here on the left, this was a few days after we rescued them. She had this far off stare where they just look into the distance, which usually means that something is wrong with their brain. And she was bullied by everyone, which is another indication that something was wrong with her. Chickens can be kind of cruel to birds who are sick or dying. And this makes sense from an evolutionary perspective because you really don't want anyone to draw attention of predators. So when I went into the group housing where they were, she would just stand right next to me because I was protecting her from the other hens. And when they were moved to the main barn, I really wanted to take her home, but there was nothing really wrong with her, so I could not. But I made sure that anytime I was coming through the barn, I would grab her and maybe take her with me on the sanctuary grounds when I was doing other things. She really enjoyed that. And when I put her back, she would try to escape through the door and come after me. So it was very sad. But thankfully, or not so thankfully, I was able to bring her home one day because she, just like Gnome, lost her ability to walk and became blind. Unlike Gnome, she never really regained her confidence. So she was able to learn how to walk again, but she was always very careful. So she took kind of staggering, stomping steps just to make sure there was ground underneath her. But she did like climbing into her water dish when it was hot. She also, like this picture on the right shows, would climb into pots and dust bathe in soil. So she was, enjoying life still, but was not able to be around other chickens. And she really just became a people bird. She really enjoyed hanging out with me. She never had to be around any of the chickens at my house, and she liked it that way. She didn't like getting baths, but she really liked getting the blow dry afterward. So just the warm air, she really enjoyed that. And at some point, she did develop seizures. So clearly, a lot of things were going on with her internally, but medication made those go away. And she just spent her time very relaxed and just hanging out. Here she is shortly before she was euthanized. So, lessons from Patagonia. Some chickens really just do not want to socialize with other chickens. I think this might be hard for people to understand because they are social, but there are individuals who just cannot survive in a group setting. And as with most animals, chickens bounce back from a lot of different issues like seizures. And although she acted differently after her blindness, she definitely was not traumatized by it. Moving on to shrimp. She was a star in the documentary that Kathrin mentioned. And shrimp was kept in the medical room at the sanctuary for a few weeks. So this was just a room with a few cages for birds that couldn't be in the main flock. It's a very sad existence for a sick bird. Normally, we would just treat everything in-house, but I begged to take her to a vet just to see if she had any ideas because she was not recovering. So here, these two pictures are of shrimp at the vet. She hated it. And the vet basically just listened to her heart, said there was a heart murmur and that she seemed lethargic, low energy, and said to euthanize her. That was all she could give me. So I said no, and I took her home with me. And it turned out to be the right decision because shrimp recovered fully from what I think was simply just a cold or a flu. she loved baths and she would just sit in the warm water as long as I would let her. So it was very comfortable for her. Um, and then she also really enjoyed sunbathing right after. So this picture down here, she is not dead or anything. She's just sunbathing and getting dirty again after a bath. She was good friends with Gabby, but also liked hanging out with me. Unlike Gabby, she was not opinionated. She really just wanted to see what I was up to. So she wasn't chatting the entire time. Instead, if I was touching something, she wanted it. So if I was eating something, she would come snatch a bite. If I was drinking something, you bet Shrimp wanted it. She was just very, very curious. When we hung out inside, like photo on the right, she would climb up on my shoulder or sit in boxes. She really enjoyed boxes like some cats do. When I was outside with her, she would sunbathe next to me or on top of my feet. So I would be wandering around and suddenly Shrimp would come out of nowhere and just plop down on my feet and I couldn't move anymore. Just a very sweet bird to hang out with. So, a big lesson I learned from Shrimp is that most vets in the US are not trained to think of chickens as individuals, really, or they are just trained to think of them as replaceable. And I did confirm with other vets that there's very little instruction in vet school about chicken care. So even if you become a large animal vet, you learn, about other farmed animals, you don't learn about chickens. She also demonstrated that individuals with completely different personalities can become best friends, which was very nice to see. And she taught me that apparently everything I do is interesting. Gwendolyn will be the last hen we talk about in detail. She also came from this red hen rescue we did. Unlike the other two, she never became paralyzed or went blind. Instead, she became adventure chicken. So she also would come say hi to me and sunbathe next to me, but she also took on other traits that none of the other birds have ever had. So she was obsessed with pomegranates, which I only found out because there were pomegranates growing on the sanctuary, so I could test out whether they liked them. So this picture on the left, this is her covered in sticky pomegranate juice that just dried on her face. Every day she got a pomegranate, she was very excited. And at first, the other chickens thought she was crazy. They thought pomegranates were disgusting. But the more they watched her enjoying them, the more they liked them. So at the end, everyone was eating pomegranates. Gwendolyn really liked exploring the property on her own, so she would leave kind of the safety of around the house and just go adventuring. She also would go into the neighbor's yard and follow the neighbor around, which was a bit of a problem. And she was the only girl who occasionally disappeared in the evening. So everyone knew they would come inside at night, so they would line up on the porch and start calling and making a fuss, saying, "Hello, let us in." Gwen sometimes would just be nowhere to be found, so I had to go hunt for her. And this was because, well, she would have made a very good mom. She was very careful when she laid an egg to be completely silent, to lie down on top of it and just protect her egg. So that's why it was hard to find her sometimes. She also became my adventure buddy because she loved being carried around. Most chickens don't really like this very much because it's confinement for them. But Gwen and I wandered around, we went on walks, and we explored things like the little creek on the property. She was just very fun to wander around with. This is her when she was passing away. She suddenly developed this faraway stare, like Patagonia had all the time. So, things to take away from Gwendolyn. Not all chickens are home buddies. Some are extremely fearless and just want to go adventuring. And some chickens will happily experiment with new foods, while most birds really only stick to things they know. I'll talk just very briefly about a few of the other girls who lived with me. Harriet was rather unusual because she would only eat kale, cucumber, and then things she could catch outside. So worms, spiders, and insects. Here we are renovating the front yard together, and she would dive in front of my shovel to grab worms. So very difficult to work, very difficult landscaping buddy. But that was something that I just really had never seen before. Vireo with the one eye, her behavior and social situation constantly changed. When we first got her, she was very confident and would bully other individuals, and then suddenly she became the bullied one and would hide. When I took her home, she suddenly became her confident self again. So that was very interesting just to watch those shifts. Lucille was the first hen that I had living with me. She was disabled. And whenever there was a hen at our house who was feeling very poorly and not really moving around a lot, she would stumble over to them and put her wing over them, which I've never seen before or since. Melina demonstrated that birds with chronic conditions that seem very irritating can act totally normal. We tried treating her sneezing, coughing symptoms, but we could never figure it out. So she just wandered around and was her normal self. And Kamala, although she learned to eat medications from my hand, she never wanted anything to do with me. And so she, I guess, never became comfortable being a house chicken. She really liked the other birds, but she never really became what I would consider a very good patient. So overall takeaways from egg-laying hens. I hope you understand that they have different preferences, likes, dislikes, and interests. They vary widely in their social needs, both with other birds and with humans. And their personalities really shine through when they're given the freedom to be themselves, when they're given room to roam and enjoy life. And most of all, they are very great companions who may boss you around, or cuddle with you, or run off and explore the world with you. Now that we've talked about egg-laying hens, I want to talk a bit about roosters. I think the perception of roosters globally is actually very negative. Billions of roosters are killed within a day of hatching in the egg and meat industries, and they are actually very sweet. So I will talk a little bit about some of the roosters. This is a picture of Grader. He was an old boy who had mobility issues, so his legs formed a bit incorrectly, so he would kick them out and swing them when he walked. So he was in this special disabled stall in the barn. But he was just a very sweet, very relaxed boy who I could do anything with. So I would just pick him up, take him outside to visit with any kind of guests or visitors we had. He allowed them to pet him. He never pecked anyone. So he was just a very good, relaxed first rooster for people to meet. That was very unlike Kevin, who had very strong feelings about me at the beginning. He actually would attack me anytime he saw me. You can see one of his spurs in this photo, and those spurs hurt quite a bit when a rooster is attacking you. Thankfully, I won him over in the end. It's hard to be angry with someone who brings you treats. And this was also very important because he was a very shy rooster in terms of getting along with other roosters. So he was pretty low in the pecking order, and other roosters would chase him around and attack him. He developed a heart condition and would turn purple. because he couldn't get enough oxygen. So toward the end of my time at the sanctuary, I actually set him up in a tiny flock of, I think, 8 birds, and he did really well with some other kind of shyer roosters and hens. Here are 2 of the other birds that lived with Kevin in his small flock. Clyde was definitely a rooster. Bonnie, we think, had both male and female traits, so I will refer to Bonnie as they, them. Bonnie would sit in nest boxes like a hen, would never lay eggs, but would sit in them for hours. And they also would attack other roosters. So it was very unclear, um, behaviorally, whether Bonnie was male or female. The one thing that was clear is that Bonnie and Clyde were inseparable. They were always snuggling together. No matter what was happening, they were right next to each other, and that was very sweet to see. So they went to live with Kevin in a smaller flock. Percy was the gentlest of roosters, I would say. I think there was always something wrong with him, but he died shortly after I got to the sanctuary. The one really fun thing about Percy is that he had the special group of hens who would take care of him. It was always the same hens. They would gather around him and preen his feathers and just look after him. And I never saw him do anything mean or bad to anybody. These are pictures of what I like to call our pocket roosters. They were very small roosters. Fox on the left, he was incredibly timid and shy, but had a large crow. I actually was able to move him to his own flock in the barn, just like with Kevin. And Fox really took on a new personality when he got to be with some hens who were just very kind and patient. Radcliffe, on the other hand, was a little terror. He was probably the favorite among visitors because he decided he would live with the turkey girls instead. So he was living with a bunch of female turkeys. And this led to some weird behavior because anytime he saw a hen, he would get so aggressive in courtship that he would scare them all away. And this was, he did this to himself, but all the hens were scared of him. So some takeaways from roosters. They have all kinds of personalities, just like hens. I think maybe even more than most hens, they are sensitive to their social environment and crowding, because if you have too many roosters and not enough space, some roosters will automatically just attack any other rooster. They're capable of changing their opinions about individual humans and other animals, and they're often very sweet and affectionate. Move on a little bit to the Cornish cross birds. So these, again, are the meat birds. Cornish cross are a little different because they are bred to put on weight as quickly as possible and then be killed. Unfortunately, this means that if you allow them to live longer, which I think is very important, they are constantly hungry, and so they need to be on a diet. And the other thing that is a big concern is because they put on so much weight, their bodies really can't handle that. So their legs often have issues just holding up that body, and they get a lot of other issues like heart problems. So although they aren't as athletic as what chickens normally are, they are still very curious and friendly. Here are 2 of our roosters. Raphael on the bottom left, he was the busybody in the barn. He always wanted to know what was happening, and no matter what you were doing, he would be watching you. So very intimidating. He also did what I would call Morse code, where he would peck at the wall, and I unfortunately never learned what he was saying, but I'm sure it was very important. Pepe, on the other hand, was very standoffish most of the time. He was very moody. Sometimes he would be interested in caregivers and want to interact, and other times he would turn his back on us. This is Malachite. He was kind of the oldest and most immobile of the birds. He normally would, hang out in a stall, not doing very much, but he loved crawling onto your lap. And he would sleep either on your lap or tucked up against your back, and he would start to purr when he was comfortable. We were able to save about 18 youngsters of this breed, and something that I had never heard of is there is a festival where people will take all of the sins or all the guilty things about themselves and put them on a chicken and then abuse the chicken, and that is supposed to absolve you of your sins. So we were able to save these guys from that fate. And something that is just so sweet about these birds is they are constantly talking to each other, just all day long, sweet little peeping noises. And I actually slept in the barn with them when they were in quarantine, and they made those sounds all night long. They were very social, very friendly. They liked interacting with each other and with me. They were immediately trusting of humans, which I found kind of interesting. So they would, crawl onto your lap. Sometimes I would have 4 or 5 of these birds just sleeping on me. And they were also very curious, so they loved running around and exploring their world. So some main takeaways from Cornish cross birds. Youngsters, like I said, they're friendly, they're chatty and curious. Although older individuals generally have mobility issues, they do still like exploring. So when you gave them things like squeaky toys, they would play with them. They are not afraid of anything. And they will often purr and coo when comfortable, which I think most people aren't aware of. We will now move on from my experiences with individual birds and talk a bit about research findings. Cognition, for those who might not be so familiar, basically is just the process of learning. So it's something that many scientists are interested in. It really took off in the 60s and 70s because at that time, more scientists were realizing that animals have feelings, that they are capable of changing their behavior, that they have personality. So that's when it really took off. Unfortunately, at that time, scientists were really only focused on species that were widely considered to be smart. But we have made great strides in that. And now the 2 bird species that are most studied in terms of cognition and intelligence are pigeons and chickens. Something I always like to bring up when talking about cognition and intelligence is the limitations of this kind of study. The main limitation is that researchers are human. So we might think we understand how an animal views the world, but we are usually wrong. Animals, their senses can be very different from ours, their experiences can be very different, and they might think about things very differently from how we do. So it's very important to always keep their ecology and behavior in mind when designing experiments and also when interpreting results. My favorite story of this is when researchers who were studying apes decided to test gibbon intelligence as well. They kept all the tests the same, and gibbons failed every single one. And it wasn't until they realized, wait, we have all our tests on the ground, and gibbons live in the trees, that they suddenly saw results. So they moved the test platforms up into the trees, and suddenly gibbons were doing very well and just as well as apes were. I also always want to emphasize the inhumane elements of research. I wanted to include some of the findings in this talk because I think they help people care about chickens, but it is also important to realize that the birds used in these studies are often not treated very well. This starts at sourcing of birds. Often they are taken directly from the egg and meat industries, which are horrific. There's usually poor standard of care while they are being used in experiments because obviously you don't want them learning in between tests of intelligence, so they're usually kept in very boring environments in between tests. The experiments themselves may be distressing and painful, especially for chicks. And generally, roosters are actually euthanized before the tests begin because no one wants to use roosters in tests like this. And birds used in the studies are generally euthanized afterward. So that's just something to keep in mind as we talk about findings. So this is the type of experiments that, sorry, it's sticking a little bit, but these are kind of the types of experiments that are used for cognition research. Generally, animals are put through foraging tests where you can kind of look at different preferences and speeds of exploration. A lot of memory and learning is studied, and how individuals respond to stress or how different habitats impact behavior. Here are just some general findings about chickens. The rearing environment impacts their learning and behavior. This makes sense. If you're raised in a habitat that is very sterile and boring, then you won't be as curious later on in life. It is also true that excessive breeding usually shrinks brain size, so fancier breeds that haven't been bred as much usually perform better, but not always. And chickens have performed similarly to crows in some learning tests, but they were generally less motivated. So this is something to think about as well, that chickens might need some other motivator to participate in tests. Something that was also true of a lot of studies was that younger individuals generally were better at learning and being flexible, just like with humans. And there were individuals who were so shy that they could never be included in tests. So some findings about chicks related to learning. Chicks within hours of hatching can tell apart familiar and unfamiliar chicks. This is both by call and by vision. And they will prefer to hang out with familiar chicks. They will also give distress calls when they are separated from their friends. This is also true if you've ever been to kind of a feed store or a store where they sell chicks. All of those calls that the chicks are making that people think are very cute are distress calls because they miss their moms. They learn very quickly from their moms and from other chicks, and they prefer learning from slightly older chicks who have more experience than chicks their age. They will avoid specific foods if they see another chick has a disgust response when eating it. Many stress behaviors that we see in farming situations, like cannibalism, are partially learned, so you can actually train birds not to engage in these behaviors. And something that I found very distressing when I heard about it is that in these farm environments, there is generally an increase in chick death at 3 to 4 days of age because they rely on their moms to show them what to eat. So they will starve. Sometimes they will use another chick as a surrogate for their mom and learn from them, but there are a lot of mortalities at this time. There are a lot of studies comparing chicken intelligence to that of other species. I don't really like this kind of comparison because every species has evolved to be intelligent in their life and to know things that they need for survival. So it's very difficult to actually compare and say, well, humans are smarter in this case, chickens are smarter in this case. It's really just every species is good at certain things and can probably outperform other species in that thing. However, I know people really like to hear about it, so I will include a few studies. Human babies and chicks were both able to recognize partly hidden objects. So, if there's a leaf or something covering up part of a food item in the habitat, they should be able to recognize that that's food. It just makes life a lot easier. And chicks were able to do this at 1 day old. They also performed similarly to macaques when they were asked to track the trajectory of an object. So if you start rolling a ball and you cover up the path, they would know that it would pop out the other side. And interestingly, chicks performed as well as adult humans when asked to identify the correct location of something using both room shape and distance from objects. A few findings about hens. They are very good moms. So I already mentioned that they teach their chicks to eat, what to eat, and how to eat. And they will change their behavior when their chicks are making mistakes and start teaching a bit more rigorously. They're also extremely protective, and when their babies are exposed to something that could be a threat, in most studies, it's like a little gust of air, they will respond and be very worried about their chicks. Some additional findings of both chicks and adult chickens. They're capable of basic logical reasoning. So in school, we usually learn about the transitive property. If A is bigger than B and B is bigger than C, then A must be bigger than C. Chickens are capable of understanding this. This makes sense because they live in social hierarchies. Very important to understand where you are in the pecking order. Hens can accurately perceive the passage of time and keep track of 6-minute intervals, which is something that I would be terrible at. So they would peck something after 6 minutes had passed, and then that's when they would receive a reward. Hens are also capable of self-control and are capable of delayed gratification. So this is when you are offered a treat now, or you can wait a little longer for 2 treats, and they would wait. So what these studies should really show you is that the everyday language about birds that at least we have in English is just very misleading and incorrect. Bird-brained is actually a compliment. It does not mean stupid and having a poor memory. Unfortunately, the world hasn't caught up to these research findings, and this type of language allows us to exploit billions of chickens every year. So that brings us to factory farming. Something that I've heard before is that it is not economically viable to treat chickens well. And whenever I hear this argument, my return argument is, well, why do we do it then if it's inhumane? And really, there is no way to farm chickens in an ethical way. Generally, chickens are treated as unfeeling production machines, and they can be destroyed or killed without any kind of thought or repercussion. I have some images here of different types of farms. In this case, each bird is kept in a small cage by themselves. They have nothing to do all day except for lay their egg. This type of battery cage is probably more common. This is what is seen throughout the US as well, but multiple birds are kept in individual cages. So there might be 4 to 6 of them crammed all together. And what is common in this kind of cage situation is that they will be debeaked, which means the tips of their beaks will be either cauterized or chopped off. Birds use their beaks to explore their world because they don't have hands. So their beaks are extremely sensitive, and debeaking will cause a lot of pain and continued pain throughout their lives. This breed, most often kept in battery cages, is the same as beetle and shrimp who I had living with me. So this is just a reminder that this is really the life that they should have had. This is a picture of a meat market with these sweet, sensitive broiler hens who we got to meet earlier in the talk. Again, they're deserving of a very different life than being sold at a meat market where often fellow birds are slaughtered in front of them. Something that a lot of people focus on is labels, and they think that labels like free range and cage free are good and show that birds are treated well. Unfortunately, these labels really have no oversight and mean basically nothing. Free range means that they have access to the outdoors, but that could just be a small window in one wall of a warehouse. And generally, birds do not ever get to go outside or see the sun. Cage free means that they're loose, but they can be crammed together in warehouses of thousands upon thousands of individuals. Another label, organic, is usually used just to show people that these eggs might be healthier for you to consume. Unfortunately, that means that the birds are not given medication. They're not allowed to get antibiotics. So you often have situations where thousands of birds die from illnesses because they cannot be treated. Just a few more images. I hope these are obviously inhumane to you after seeing kind of the care that went into all of the hospice hens I had at my house. With meat birds especially, they cannot move often, or if they can kind of scoot around on the ground and they just lose a lot of their feathers. Here's some organic egg farms. Again, just way too many birds. Very crowded, very stressful. Here's a smaller scale farm that still is overcrowded and has no kind of mental stimulation. Do want to focus just very briefly on welfare labels because some people argue that pasture-raised chickens are at least raised humanely. Here's an image of a pasture-raised chicken farm where they raise 400,000 hens every year. Yes, they have access to outside and grass, but there's still, a lot of stress from being housed with so many other birds. There's no room for exploring, really. There's a lot of competition around water containers, like down at the bottom here, or food. So it's still not ideal. And I will say again that massive numbers of chickens cannot be raised humanely. I will talk very briefly about my experience with rescued birds. So this was all of those red hens I showed you before. They came from a pasture-raised organic farm. We rescued 500 of them. They were able to roam in the field during the day, and at night they were crammed into filthy trailers that were never cleaned. All hens arrived with signs of having had illnesses, which means that only the strong survived. A lot passed away. The only medicine they were given was rosemary oil, which is not medication at all. Many had a lot of issues. We also noticed that workers handled the chickens very roughly when they were bringing them to us, including dangling them by their legs, which is a no-no. And the birds throughout their lives continued to show weird behaviors related to eating, drinking, and getting on with other birds. So, in a nutshell, the reality is that there's no humane way to keep hundreds or thousands of birds. Here's some of the issues that are common when keeping so many birds. And I'm sure some of you might be asking, well, what about backyard chicken coops? Surely they're better, right? Because there are fewer birds. Well, the reality is that they can be just as inhumane as large-scale farms. So most people will get their chicks from the egg and meat industries. So again, these poor chicks that have been funneled through this pipeline. They provide very little or no medical treatment, often because they do not have the money to give vet treatments to chickens. They generally have a very poor understanding of chicken behavior, so they often won't even notice when a bird is sick. And they have a poor understanding of sanitation and enrichment needs, which becomes very important, especially if you have more than just 5 birds. What I've found is that a lot of people who keep chickens in their backyards is that they still treat them as robots. They think of them as just they're there to give them eggs. Once they stop laying eggs, we need to get rid of them or buy more. So they're very much seen as possessions still. Coops are often inadequate in terms of room to forage and act like chickens. They also often have issues with protection from the elements. So although chickens are okay in the winter, often these coops really provide minimal warmth and comfort. And also protection from predators is usually not really considered an important thing. I strongly believe that chickens should be treated as family, and it takes a lot of effort to keep them happy and healthy that most people aren't really aware of. So we will finish this talk with sanctuaries. Unfortunately, sanctuaries can also be very problematic, and chicken care can vary widely at these facilities. I've noticed that caregivers often feel a deeper connection and understanding of mammal resident needs versus bird needs, so there might be 2 levels of care. One of the common misconceptions that I have heard a lot is it's fine for chickens to live in large flocks, they're social. All you need to make sure of is that each rooster has 8 hens. Unfortunately, this is wrong. You need to make sure that each rooster has the space and room to have a distinct territory. They're highly territorial, and they don't care so much about which hens are roaming around, but they will fight excessively if they don't have enough room. The shy roosters will just hide in corners. It's really bad for them. Another conception that people have is that birds don't feel pain like mammals do. This is absolutely incorrect. There are many studies that show that birds feel as much pain as we do. People have also told me that you can't tell when a bird is dying and that they just find dead birds in the barn. This was true of the sanctuary where I worked before I got there. And here are just a few examples of things that you would notice from a dying or sick bird. I won't read them out, but these are just, some of the things that you can pick up on to tell you that a bird is suffering. Here's a really wonderful quote that I found, and basically in a nutshell, it's easy to tell when a chicken is feeling acute pain because usually they're flapping around and really suffering. Chronic pain may go undetected, so it's always good to treat anything that would cause pain to a human, to yourself. You should treat that in chickens as well. I also was told that integration of new birds is easy if you just dump them in the barn at night. This is very wrong. Integration should take days, if not weeks, especially with roosters. Just making sure that everyone gets along and not just subjecting them to, a night where they're very scared because they have no idea where they are, and then a morning or many mornings where the roosters in the flock will just pick on them incessantly. I've also been told that there are so many birds sometimes that it's impossible to recognize individuals. And I would say that is also wrong. I learned to visually identify 200 individuals. And yes, it takes effort and time, but it's very important for individual care. Finally, the thing I heard most often that really bothered me was, oh, this is how we've always done things. And I think that is a very terrible attitude to have in any aspect of life, especially when it comes to animal care, because we are constantly learning about new ways to improve care and new things that chickens may need. So here are just a few things that you can just improve in general, especially at sanctuaries. Um, Creating small flocks of birds with compatible personalities is a huge thing. It reduces stress, and everyone is just so much happier when they can live with a few other chickens who are similar to them. And also allowing sick chickens to have outdoor access is very important for their mental health and for their recovery. So the three main takeaways from this talk are first, that chickens are individuals with personality, emotions, and intelligence, that chickens deserve to be treated with care and given freedom to act like chickens, and also that very few people really understand what it means to provide care to chickens and are actually able to do this effectively. Here are my references, and now I will be open to any questions.
Thank you so much, Maria, for this insightful talk. I think you've given us a great deal to reflect on, both in terms of the scientific evidence you provided about chicken cognition and individuality, but also the broader ethical and societal implications that follow. So we have a number of questions. Let's see how many we are able to answer. So what is one experience with an individual chicken that most changed how you understand them? Can you point to one?
Yes. Well, I think one of the most traumatic, in a way, experiences for me was when we brought those young meat chickens to the sanctuary, and there was one specific bird, Goblin, who had a lot of leg issues, and just the fact that she immediately trusted me when no human had ever shown her kindness, and she just immediately climbed into my lap and fell asleep. I mean, that was really heartbreaking and completely shattered my view of meat chickens.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing that animals still sometimes trust us after what we've done to them, you know. So yeah. Um, how do chickens express personality in ways that people might not immediately recognize?
So I'm a bird vocalization person. So this is a very easy question for me to answer. Chickens have a lot of different calls, and once you understand their calls, you can tell when someone is very angry or frustrated or even jealous. It's all in their voice. And most people will just hear, a chicken making a noise, but that noise has a lot of information encoded in it.
So that brings me to another question that was asked. How well explored is the language of chickens? Are there ways to understand what they are saying when talking to each other or to humans? And maybe another question also relating to that, another participant is asking, how can I communicate with my voice movements, etc., to chickens? that I like, so indicating that the person is not harmful, so also like the
Yeah.
interactions with our voice.
hmm There is not a lot published about chicken vocalizations. You can absolutely learn what individuals are saying. If you know their personalities, it's a lot easier, and you can start recognizing their voice and the different calls. Um, Different calls mean different things as well. So, after they lay an egg, they often have this specific call, and that is only ever given in that context. In regards to making sure they think you are a good person and safe. Not acting like a predator is very important. So they don't really like when you swoop down and grab them from above, because that's what a predator would do, for example. So kind of approaching them on their level. Um, they can understand when you're angry. They can hear that in your voice and see that in your body language. So just being relaxed, talking to them very gently, just things that you would use for any wild animal, really.
And one more question in this area. A listener writes that she once saw a video from a farm sanctuary. In the video, they said that chickens will name specific humans, meaning they make a specific sound to refer to a specific human, not all humans. Do you have any experience with that?
I haven't heard those sounds specifically, but they definitely recognize us. So they reacted very differently when I went into the barn than when other caregivers went in there. So although maybe I wasn't focusing on their calls, their behavior definitely changed depending on who went in there.
And to what extent do current scientific frameworks miss or overlook individuality in chickens?
Well, the current scientific framework overlooks individuality in most animals, actually. It is getting better, but generally experimental setups don't really allow you to, acknowledge that each individual used in an experiment is an individual. So there's a lot of room for growth in that. Also, when looking at like personality tests, usually they focus on something very black and white. So, is this individual shy or bold? There's no real room for anything in between. So, I think we're constantly going to be improving on that, but it's also very difficult.
And then the next question, how does your observational lived experience complement or challenge experimental approaches in animal behavior research? You touched a little bit, or you implied a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, so throughout my undergraduate and graduate experiences, I got a lot of pushback from professors and scientists about not wanting to do anything harmful to any animals. I was told I could not be a good scientist. And this was just very interesting to me because most of what I've learned about animals was from observation. So you can learn so much if you sit back, turn off your ego, and just try to observe what's going on around you. And that's something that many scientists aren't really aware of or are maybe slowly becoming comfortable with, but it's definitely something that needs to happen more, widely.
Yes, definitely. There was one comment about backyard chickens, and I think your idea about backyard chickens was that people keep them because they want eggs and not because they rescued them. So there just was a comment about, of course, there's a difference between rescued birds and um, people who just want to have eggs. Yeah, so basically, of course, I think you and also we promote that chickens are rescued and given a great life. Maybe there I have a question about you showed what the difference is in our how we bred chickens and how many eggs they lay 250 to 300, I think. And of course, that is a problem for their health. I mean, they are, to my knowledge, the species with the most incidence of ovarian cancer.
Yes.
And then they have the cloacal prolapse, and which is very painful, and of course, yeah, leads to pecking of other hens and stuff like that. So all those issues that are caused, also osteoporosis is a topic. All those issues that are caused are through the egg laying for egg laying hens. Do you have experience? Because I saw with vegan chicken rescuers that they actually used hormonal implants to keep them from laying eggs, which I think most, like the general public, might find absurd because they don't understand why this is a health problem if you lay so many eggs, and what actually the point is of rescuing animals. But do you have experience with this? Um,
Yes, I helped implant some of our birds, the ones that had a lot of health issues and really shouldn't be laying any more eggs. Unfortunately, implants are very expensive and only last about 2 to 3 months. So it's something that the sanctuary couldn't really afford to do on, a full scale for all of the hens, but it definitely completely changes their lives. It's very beneficial for them. And I would definitely recommend doing it if you have chickens as pets rather than egg-laying robots.
Um, so what becomes is ethically unacceptable once we truly recognize chickens as individuals?
Well, just the way we treat them, I think it's immoral. I think it's horrid. And when you realize that every one of these billions of individuals are actually individuals with their own wants and needs, I think then, we can't really sleep at night if we think about if we're contributing to this much torture, really, of billions of animals. We would, we need to make a change.
Yeah, indeed. There are many more questions from the audience. One person is saying that they regularly were at sanctuaries where also hybrid chickens and some roosters were taken care of. And she remembered that she was surprised to see that quite a few in the flocks were not using the perches, which would be the natural way of resting behavior.
Mhm.
In the first instance, she thought the kind of purchase or the arrangements in the barn, there might be something problematic about it. Did you experience chickens that were also not would also not use the purchase at all? Um, is there an explanation, like, yeah, from your viewpoint as a behavioral ecologist?
Yes, there's always an explanation. Often the birds that we had that would lie on the ground couldn't get up onto the perches anymore, so they were either really old or sick or something was wrong with them. There's also a problem if there are too many birds. Some of them will get pecked and chased off of perches, so they'll just sleep on the ground. With meat birds, it's actually dangerous for them to be above the ground, and they just can't fly up to those perches, so their perches should be basically on the ground. So that can also be, depending on if it's egg laying or meat birds, that can also be the case.
Okay. And then, of course, unfortunately, I mean, I can open the chat again, but because we have so many questions, I didn't want to get everything mixed up. But of course, several listeners also thank you for your wonderful talk and love the images that you shared. And yeah, they find it very impressive and inspirational. And one person is asking if you could tell us more about chickens as companions and how we could best change people's perception of chickens given the rising appetite of cheap chicken meat.
I love that question. Yeah, so the birds I got to live with, they were just as fun and engaging as, dogs and cats. They have slightly different needs, but they're every bit as worthy of love as companion animals. I do know that some people who keep chickens really only care about them as pets, which is wonderful. I think from my experience, the people we had adopt rescued hens, almost none of them cared about them as individuals. They just wanted eggs. So that was really concerning. But I think many people, when exposed to chickens, realize that they have personality and they're really fun. So I think the more exposure that happens, the better people's perception of chickens will be, and the more compassion we will have for chickens.
Yeah, actually, I made that experience. I think it was already 10 years ago in Barcelona, where a friend of mine who's actually attending the webinar now, she also has three chickens, but back then she was still living in the city center, and we found a rooster that was injured, and we had to, like, he was chased away from the flock, which
Hmm.
obviously happens a lot, and then there are single roosters. And then we also confiscated a 1 day old chick that some kids had stolen from, I don't know, there are some wild, semi-wild chickens there. And then I took that back to Berlin actually in the airplane because another friend of mine who has, yeah, a lot of rescued animals near Berlin would take in this chicken because we didn't know if it would turn into a rooster, which is of course
Hmm.
problematic in a city. You're not allowed to have roosters in Barcelona. So I remember having this chicken or this baby chick on my shoulder in the airplane, and because it was making so much noise in the little cage, I had to take it out. Actually, the flight attendants were really nice. They first were not amused, and then they talked to the whatever boss and they said fine. So people were very yeah, impressed by this. And also I went on the train with the chicken or the baby chick and brought her to Brandenburg. And I think that just this exposure kind of, people don't have that, obviously.
Yeah.
So there are more questions about egg laying and pain.
Hmm.
So one person is asking if they make, she says, why do hens make those loud noises when they lay an egg? Is that pain? And another person is asking, since you mentioned that in the beginning, does it always cause pain to the chickens to lay eggs, or only under certain circumstances?
I think it's always uncomfortable. From my experience, it seems like younger birds experience less pain with laying. I think just because their skin is more flexible and can stretch more easily. Um, the loud calling after laying, I think, is a combination of pain and also relief because this giant thing is now outside of them. Um, but yes, I think overall, in general, laying an egg causes pain, and often I have seen eggs that are covered in blood because they will tear up the inside of the cloaca when they're getting pushed out of the bird's body.
Another person is saying, I would love to see an app developed where you can record and tag the context of the vocalization of individual chickens. I don't know if this is already in progress, maybe, who
I
knows?
don't know. I would love that. That would be wonderful.
Yeah. A question about roosters. Doesn't keeping adult roosters in groups go against their natural behavior and inevitably leads to fights and a great deal of stress?
Yeah, so naturally there would be only one or two roosters in each flock. I think at the sanctuary there were so many roosters who were very relaxed, so they could live together and they really formed friendships. But overall, yeah, you have to be very careful with roosters. I do know that if you don't have any hens, roosters will get along much better. I think just because their hormones are not cycling as much. They aren't as aggressive when hens aren't present. So I think that's one way we could take better care of roosters if you just have, a bunch of roosters living together, don't even bring hens into the picture, and they will just kind of relax and live together in harmony.
You mentioned that few people are able to care for chickens yet that they deserve to be treated like human family members. How could people learn? Because
That's
obviously your talk is something that people don't find anywhere, you know.
Yeah, no, it's a problem because if you go online, there are so many resources for how to take care of chickens, and a lot of information is wrong. There are a few websites that give pretty good information, but again, there's also that behavioral element that's usually missing. So, as far as I know, these resources aren't really available currently. Um, I don't know if I need to make something and put it online, but it's difficult to find the right information.
The person says they live in a small vegan animal sanctuary with 7 hens, and they appreciated this talk so much and got a new ideas on how to improve their lives. Um, have you given any supplements for arthritis to hens? Is one question. Actually, we didn't get to all the veterinary questions. And the second, do you have suggestions on good food for extra support feeding when they do not eat as much?
Yeah, glucosamine can help uh, with I think the question was about arthritis or something like that. Supplements can help and often help birds more than they help humans, so a lot of supplements are totally acceptable for chickens. In terms of food, I think when a bird is sick, you shouldn't worry too much about what they are not eating, but focus on what they can eat. So, a lot of produce, try giving them a lot of different kinds of produce. They love watermelon, they love corn, they like greens, so like kale or lettuce. Just try to give them a lot of different foods, broccoli, and other things that are kind of fatty, so like coconut or sunflower seeds can be really helpful for them to regain a bit of weight. But just giving them all kinds of variety so that you can figure out whether there's something they will eat, and hopefully they start feeling a bit better and will go back to eating a nice balanced diet again afterward.
Wonderful. And then just maybe to wrap up, because there were some questions about, is there any way of keeping chickens to still use their eggs? I think you already said a lot on that, but maybe we should add that in addition to the scientific evidence we've been discussing today on chicken cognition, sentience, and individuality, and the ethical implications that follow, there is also a growing body of research examining the health impacts, the human health impacts of both egg and poultry consumption. And I think this is something that's not talked about enough, because it contrasts with the common perception of eggs and chicken as quote unquote healthy, or at least neutral dietary choices. And I can just point listeners to there are large cohort studies that they suggest that poultry consumption is not risk-free, and it's associated with increased cardiovascular risk in a similar direction as red meat and processed meat. There's always this focus on red meat, processed meat, because the World Health Organization declared them as carcinogens, but white meat is not better. So if you think that, the same for eggs. I mean, eggs is a concentrated source of dietary cholesterol. So, and elevated LDL cholesterol is well established as a causal driver for atherosclerosis. And that's, of course, an underlying process of cardiovascular disease.